Hello everybody and welcome back once again to the incredibly poorly lit studio where I'll be attempting to shoot video. Taking into account I've got a couple of batteries here, none of them are any good, and I've got a battery in the camera and that's not very good either, and I'm doing this in the middle of a working day, so I will have to stop the video at various times and probably put another battery in the camera, take a call from a client, and so on and so forth, because essentially that's what my life is about right now. But let's just carry on and see what we can do within this video when talking about thought. So although a few of my sort of like pen and paper videos that you've been seeing recently, ta-da, modern technology, isn't that sexy, right, have essentially been to do with transcendental deism, what I'm going to be doing today is talking about thinking, because essentially if you don't know how to think, then there's no point in approaching subjects which are either spiritual or natural science in any way whatsoever, unless of course you've got the right way of building up ideas and understanding inside you. Okay, so let's start from you where you are right now. Bottom left hand corner of a piece of paper, a stick person, and that stick person is you as at your current state of being. So far you've gone through a certain quantity of life. You've had your infancy when you were born, you had your infancy, you've had your childhood, and you've moved through that. You probably had your adolescence and really had a terrible time there, and now you're basically a proper grown up and you're now watching YouTube videos. So everything that you are so far is a combination of your physical makeup, physical well-being, the combination of experiences you've had to date, and your current understanding is there. Okay, so everything that's made you from here to there has been based upon a certain quantity of understanding. So therefore, at this time of life, when you have gone through this, that, and the other, you've only got a certain quantity of experience and knowledge, which means that you are capable of talking to people from the basis of current knowledge and experience that you've got. But let's say you want to try and get more, and you want to try and progress so that, like, this time, not only next year, but this time in maybe 10 years time, you have a greater quantity of knowledge and you are able to speak. I can't draw a mouth, but let's just try and draw a mouth here somehow. No, let's not. Okay, well I'll try do that. Then we got teeth in there. A very badly drawn mouth, and it's speaking. You can speak to people about various different things based upon your knowledge and your experience and your understanding now. But what is the way of improving that? How on earth are you going to improve your knowledge and your understanding? And that then would have to go through a particular method, a particular way of doing things. I always found it quite shocking when I was unfortunately in university, and I met people who, let's say, doing their first year at university. Alright, so they've gone through school, they've gone through, nursery school, primary school, they've gone through middle school, they've gone through a bit of secondary school. They were good enough to get their A-levels. If they didn't do that, then they did something like an access course, and then that got them somehow into university, and it's now in their first year, and they're doing, I don't know, physics. Alright, then some idiots would say of the person who's their first year and is doing physics, studying, not studied. Alright, badly spelled, of course, because this is me doing my little drawings. So studying, not studied, and not studied with sufficient subject-specific work experience. Some idiot would say of this person who is studying in their first year of university and they're only through the first couple of terms, oh, they know physics. This is, of course, bollocks. because the individual has only got from there to there, they've gone to college, they're only doing their first year, so they're only about there in terms of their understanding, whereas essentially the phrase they know physics could only be applied to someone who's gone through a much larger path of developments and understanding intellectually and academically and experientially in order to build their understanding up to the point whereby they could then be said that they know physics. But even then, physics itself is quite a broad subject, so it could be a wide variety of different physical things. It could be things more associated with engineering, it could be things more associated with the designs of new light bulbs, or it could be the physics associated with, I don't know, the generation of energy using quarks and pulsars and God alone knows what else is going on in the universe in any way, on any permutation whatsoever. So they don't know physics, do they? They don't know. Alright? And knowledge and knowing things is essentially what this one particular video is about. Alright? But the standard human reaction is that that person knows something. Well, no, they just know different things from yourself from a different point of view. They don't actually have the right quality of knowledge for you to be able to say that they know something. Of course, in the spiritual world, everyone knows something and everyone's wise, because essentially that's what people assume, that they actually know something and they are wise. But, you know, you're a regular person, you're watching a YouTube video, for crying out loud sake. This is not actually a university. This is just me talking to you with a piece of paper and a pen. So let's say you want to find things out, right? There's various things that you could do. All right? You can, number one, read. But the problem with reading is that you must not stop. Because at whatever level of books you're reading at, alright, whatever type of books you're reading at, then you are holding your knowledge up to exclusively that one particular level. And the vast majority of books that you do read, they only come from specific points of view. Those specific points of view are specific to the individuals who have written them, their personal history, what they have been through, what it is they want the world to see, so their own intention. It will also have their own problems in it. So there's lots of things there which could skew a lot of the things that you read. So, and I'm talking about this from the point of view of an individual who has read a fair few academic books over his history. And I've not necessarily come to a full, complete understanding of this, that, and the other as a result of the process of just reading books. Then the next stage would have to be experimentation, wouldn't it? Because essentially if you're just spending all your time reading, all you're ending up doing is developing points of view. Alright, all you do is develop points of view. And the least intelligent people in the world would actually start applying the word belief to those points of view. They would say things like, I believe this, and I don't believe that. And that is both hilarious and incredibly stupid, because the word believe is the opposite of knowledge. Alright, if you believe something you actually don't know. But in order for you to be able to say that you do know, you would have to have a very refined and very advanced reading list. And not only that, you would have had to have taken points of view and done something very frightening. Very, very, very frightening. You have to put them to the test. Okay? I mean, you can't read a book on, let's say, nutrition. Okay, let's say you read a book on nutrition, or a series of books on nutrition. You've dedicated 5 years of your whole life to reading books on nutrition. Okay, then you might be convinced that nutrition is essentially the only way forward. So you should be addressing all of your health complaints and the health complaints of everybody else in the world purely with nutrition, because, you know, the old adage happens to hold that if you have a hammer, all problems look like a nail. And that is a very serious issue, even with some of the most well-read people in the world. You can read an awful lot, but it doesn't matter what you've read. You've got the problems of the authors, their history, their experiences, their own personal intentions, which might not even be associated properly with the search for knowledge. And then you've got their own personal problems, their own particular specific hang-ups, which is also going to twist their understanding of what could possibly be true. So essentially, reading itself is only part of the process of finding things out. What you then need to do is putting things to the test. Okay, put them to the test. Now, a person of great intelligence would try and move away from the concept of I believe to the alternative point of view of I don't believe. Through the process of experimentation. Now, in order to experiment, you've got to work out what you're experimenting on. And you've got to then look at the different points of view that you have gone through for the purposes of working out whether that particular experiment is essentially something that's worthwhile you doing yourself, in order to put to the test something which is being presented to you as a result of your reading. So essentially reading things, or these days of course watching YouTube videos, and of course reading blogs, and, you know, finding things out through absorbing media. We'll call it absorbing media here. That is only part of the process. Now, if you are someone who's, you know, spend a lot of your time absorbing media, whether you're reading books by some of the great people in the literati sphere at the moment, whether you're reading books on science, whether you're watching YouTube videos upon science or technology or art or musicals and God alone knows what else, that becomes a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the process, because all you're doing is essentially receiving other people's opinions. What you're not doing is growing in knowledge, which would be way over here. Now, when you're experimenting, you'd have to work out how you're experimenting and what ways you're going through the process of thinking things through. Part of your experimentation needs to be thought experiments. That's more like the word throat anyway, but never mind. It's supposed to be thought. Thought. Thought experiments, whereby you work out for yourself why some things should possibly be happening under some particular conditions. The results of your thought experiment would essentially only be more beliefs or more opinions. But whereas physical experimentation would be actually experimenting with nature itself. And if you're experimenting with nature itself, then essentially what you're doing is you're putting your knowledge or your beliefs or your opinions sufficiently to the test to be able to get some variety of deeper opinion as to what else can happen. Therefore, the process of experimentation should take you through a number of different stages in order to bring yourself closer to this thing which we could call the gaining of knowledge. Now, within all of your reading, after you have received other people's points of view, you have to work out whether those points of view are worthwhile putting to the test, or whether there are others out there. So after having reading things and absorbing media, you then have to look at other sources. Which means competing points of view. Which means something really terrifying. Things you don't believe in. Which means even things you could be embarrassed about telling other people you've read or experimented with. Okay, now this means that if you're a proper person who's going to think things through properly and try and build up a certain quantity of extra knowledge about the way in which the world works, a lot of the things that you've got to read and a lot of the things you've got to find out about and a lot of the things you've therefore got to also experiment with will be things that maybe even your family, your friends and your peers and everyone around you might even regard as being a bit silly. So therefore, if you're going to have any interest in the gaining of knowledge, you're going to have to do something risky. And then go contrary to everything else that you had read from the primary sources which have been directed to you as a result of education, as a result of your teachers, your lecturers, your schooling, even your family and friendships, in order to try and bring about the state of being in the future whereby we can truly say that you have actually gained knowledge. And this riskiness is going to have to become part of your experimentation, which can then lead you forward. When I'm saying risky here, I'm not saying putting yourself to risk. I'm sort of talking about risky in terms of the information, the ideas and the understanding that you're picking up and the various different sources which are being brought your way. But at this point, things can get a bit difficult, because essentially when you're going through the process of finding things out, you often want someone to talk to in order to discuss with them what you're finding out, what you're experimenting with, what is working, what is not working, and what way it's working and what way it's not working. But if you've got regular, normal, ordinary, everyday people around you, they might have a particular negative reaction. They might say something like, "How dare you be so stupid to believe such a thing?" which is of course moronic because they're using the word believe, which demonstrates they themselves are only basing their understanding of reality based upon what's going on between their little ears. There's a gormless person there who's got some ears, and they are basing everything upon what they believe. Therefore they, the person you just told, is only assessing reality exclusively based upon what's going on inside their little head. Completely oblivious, of course, to the fact that there is something in the outer world called reality and nature, which are actually quite fascinating things. And it's well worth trying to find out more about reality and nature through some variety of experimentation. So if you're going to go through the process of telling somebody about some of the things you want to experiment with and explore, then you may come across a few blocks and obstacles, because the vast majority of people are not thinking people, they are believers, including those who are members of the atheist community. So that's another level of ridiculousness that the world has got to cope with, and the only thing that's going on here for them is what's going on there, and that's only based upon what they have been encouraged to think. And they've been encouraged to think this because they feel that it's the ideas which is right for them, or the ideas that they think is right for society, or the ideas which satisfies their own particular political interpretation as to how the world is put together, or their own particular scientific and or religious point of view, all of which is just points of view. None of which are tested sufficiently for there to be any real sense of knowledge or facts. No, none of that whatsoever. And you can tell that quite simply because they process the world through the point of view of belief. Either they believe something, or they disbelieve. And both of which, as I demonstrated in previous videos, is of course an out and out fiction. Because it's based upon incomplete and inappropriate knowledge whatsoever. That's a fiction, that's a fiction. Both are quite simply bullshit. Okay, written the word bullshit there just to illustrate the point that both belief and disbelief is in fact bullshit. So let's think about what we're trying to test and why we're trying to test it and what the process of testing should actually be. So you've been given a point of view, or you've looked at a point of view. Let's say in my case it's electrical means of looking after your health or affecting your health and well-being one way or another. This is of course a basic Doncroft zapper, which you're probably sitting there and thinking, Nick, you're a lunatic, I don't believe in this. Right, in that case you're coming from the point of view of being a fucking moron who is full of bullshit, because you either have disbelief or you have belief, and you haven't sufficiently put this to the test against reality. So there are opinions which need to be tested. Okay, needs to be tested somehow. So you're not going to invest your entire life in this thing because you've gained this one particular opinion. What you're going to do is to start small, just like I did with the Doncroft zapper. All right, and see what happens. Now it is possible that you won't necessarily get a particular experimental type result which you can build an understanding of if your circumstances are not right for that one particular thing. the opinions or points of view or beliefs you've already picked up could in fact be false. The thing that you're putting to test, you could be putting to the test against the wrong thing. The wrong thing to the test against wrong natural forces. Alright, so you could be putting, I don't know, let's say a healing technology to the test against one thing, but you've actually got something else wrong with you, or you've entered into it at the wrong time of life, and so on and so forth. So you could easily be putting the wrong thing to the test against the wrong natural forces, or the wrong circumstance is wrong for the thing you're putting to the test. You could be applying the wrong force against the wrong forces in nature. And therefore, you would have to put your original opinions to the test themselves to see whether you've actually got things right or got things wrong. What were you putting to the test? In what way were you putting it to the test? What things were you putting it to the test against? Was it right to put that thing to the test against those other things? Were you therefore moving intellectually in the right direction or the wrong direction? These things have to be thought through, because you can't build an opinion. I mean, let's say I wanted to use this to see whether it would help me to fly. That would be bullshit, wouldn't it? Because essentially this does not give you the ability to fly. This gives you the ability to do what it gives you the ability to do. So you've got to therefore look at the specific theories and putting specific theories to the test. Now, when you get something which seems to be suggesting you are moving in the right direction, namely there is something which is happening, you may then have to go back to some of your original reading previously to try and work out whether there was anything from there which could possibly shed some light on what's happening when something does seem to happen. This will involve a new direction of reading. Or these days, YouTube video watching and the rest of it, deeper research. But your deeper research will be into other opinions which could possibly be leading you in the right direction. So you're still coming across further opinions which could be both right or wrong. Or indeed relevant or irrelevant to what you're looking at. Or irrelevant. Now, going through the process of exploring a new set of ideas has its own dangers, and its own dangers are the same kind of dangers that we had a look at on my previous little paper PowerPoint slide, if I can find it. I don't have that much in the way of fingerprints these days, so it's difficult. You're going back to reading more authors, more original video creators, more, I don't know, TikTok bloggers, whatever it is that's going on out there. And they've got their own history, they've got their own experiences, they've got their own intentions, and they've got their own problems. And that causes more and more confusion and complexity. So the deeper you're looking into this, once you've had something happening, boom, 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 right, something happening, can cause you to have even more complexities. But on the other hand, that just gives you an array of different points of view to also look at. When I say look at, I don't just mean look at, I mean to actually put to the test. Now, the whole thing is, of course, going to seem even more risky because you're going to be taken down what is commonly referred to as a rabbit hole. Dramatic boundary there. Okay, rabbit hole. Of opinions, all from a wide variety of different sources, some of which may have come your way with the right quantity of experimentation, and some of it not quite so well. Okay, so it could be good or bad. Which could be good experimentation or bad experimentation, alright? And then you'll have to assess whether any of those sources are in fact good enough. Now, hopefully, once you've reached this point of something happening, you've probably had a look at some of the things which you came across in your previous reading from earlier on, which may have actually given you a bit of basic understanding as to how some aspects of the natural world seem to operate. This may give you, if you're lucky, the ability to choose which would be the better new levels of opinions to start looking at and looking into. Then what you can then do is you can take that and start the whole process again. And the whole process would be to, number one, build a deeper understanding of those points of view. Which again brings you into the various risky different areas, because there'll be some of these understanding which is better, some which is worse, some of which is based upon false thinking, and some of which is based upon people having opinions and not having done any experimentation or investigation before, and so therefore there'll be even more complexity coming your way. But what you've also got to be doing is trying to work out what your original intention was, and to try and work out which of these ideas being presented to you follows your original intention, and what it is you're trying to work out, what it is you're trying to find out. Now, a lot of people in this world don't have sufficient needs to find things out. In my case, I've suffered from some have had some quite serious things going wrong with my health. I had very serious need to try and find answers, and I wasn't getting any help or support from relevant sources, so I had to try and find my own answers, and the Don Cross Zapper was a stage that I went through in getting my knowledge together so I could be healthy enough to actually present this one particular video to you. Because most people don't actually have sufficient need to actually improve their life or enhance their life, or indeed to move their life in various different particular directions, and their obsession is only for themselves, for their property, for their family, and for their children, and all that kind of stuff, they tend to stop at a certain level of intellectual development, which I personally think is an abhorrence, because essentially we are supposed to be the spearhead of evolution in every possible way, and therefore as individuals we have some variety of moral obligation in order to increase knowledge, and therefore we should be thinking about things and finding things out which don't satisfy our needs but could in fact satisfy the needs of other people moving further forward. That's just a point I thought I'd raise to you. So discussing things with regular people is it becomes a bit useless. Okay, so we're talking about building a deeper understanding of the various different points of view. How can that happen? Again, through the two routes. The first one can lead to delusion, and the second one would in theory lead you to the truth. One is purely thought experiments. which involves thinking things through, discussion, and debate. But there's a problem with that, because discussion and debate only enables a person to be able to prove how good they are at discussion and debate, and not necessarily as far as moving further forward into the truth is concerned. If people want to discuss things and debate things, all they want to try and do is prove they are cool, and probably to try and purely, I mean, that's a combative environment. Discussion and debate is a combative environment. So it's not associated specifically with the search for the truth. And can lead to more fictions. Which means that the intellectual process doesn't necessarily help you as much as the process of direct experiment. And direct experiment is against nature. Okay, and nature has its own laws which are 100% absolute, such as Newton's laws of nature, the laws associated with gravity and how gravity works, and also maybe even social nature and medical nature and biochemical nature as well. So nature itself appears to be a much better thing for you to actually put things to the test against, which means bringing yourself up to the point whereby you can actually do a variety of experiments. Now this of course could take time, because for some experiments you need to have a bit of money coming in, you need to have a certain quantity of financial stability, and therefore you need to work on whatever career is appropriate for yourself, and ideally a career in which you can fit in the process of finding things out directly from nature. Now, when you're going through the process of finding things out from nature, you also got to think about your experimental design and your thinking and so on and so forth. So we'll write that down as well. Yeah. And indeed, whether the equipment and the understanding that you've got is sufficient for you to be able to draw intelligent conclusions from nature. Okay. Because if you were to explore something, let's say, for your particular health, and you're one particular person who has one particular illness, therefore one particular treatment seems to help you in one particular way, that one particular health problem could be caused by a wide variety of different things. And it happens to be that one thing you're experimenting with which seems to move you roughly in the right direction. It won't necessarily be there for everyone. There's lots of ways in which you've got to look at these things. There's always going to be a certain level of nuance in terms of how you understand nature and how you're exploring nature in order to bring yourself to the right level of understanding. Now, there's such a thing as proper scientific experiments, but there's also the things which you have to do yourself at home, which can provide you with a certain level of clarity of thought in its own right. Now, as it were, proper scientific experiments is not necessarily something which the average individual can do at home. No, there will always be a certain level of ways in which you're missing out on the full scientific method. But if we actually look at the scientific method to a certain extent, when they have a hypothesis, which is then put to the test, often in two conditions. With the first condition, maybe that is the one with something from your hypothesis thrown into it. That becomes your experimental condition. And then the second one is done without whatever your hypothetical thing is thrown into it, which is called the control. And there will be something called a sample size, which will be number of people or animals or whatever it is you're experimenting on, which will have to be large enough so that certain mathematical equations can then be applied to the results to work out whether the thing you put into the experimental design or the thing you put into the control condition was essentially the thing which actually makes things actually start to work and move in the right direction. But that has to be done using mathematics. Of a complicated level, and we call that stuff statistics. Now, that is the way in which science does things. We can try and mimic some of this process to a certain extent at home. I mean, once you've done your statistical analysis, you'll then have an equation and a number which will tell you whether, you know, the extra thing which you put into from your experimental design has actually created a sufficient positive result, and the result is not just due to chance. So we got to think about the possibility of things being due to chance, okay? Okay, boom. For this reason, lots of people are rather staggered that science doesn't actually turn around to you and tell you what the truth is, because the word science is the way of experimenting into nature in order to find out what is most likely to be true. Okay, regular science, proper science. You know, we're talking about the stuff which scientists do, people with like more PhDs than I've had hot curries. They are involved with what is most likely to be true rather than facts, okay? Science does not state fact. Therefore, when we're experimenting at home with various different things, we've also got to be able to make sure that our results of whatever it is we're doing, okay, is not stated as a fact, but is stated as what appears to be true at the time, under whatever circumstances is we're actually working on. Okay, so there will always be, both in science as well as being a human individual at home working things out for yourself, stuff you don't know. Always. That doesn't come to an end. Now, if science itself does not state fact, alright, and science has like experimental conditions which might have, let's say, I don't know, a sample size of, let's say, 1,000 people in it being submitted to, I don't know, pill A from the whatever, and they got 1,000 people there, and they've got been given a placebo pill. You know, that's like a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of investment has gone into effect in order to try and bring about the ability to be able to do that one particular experiment. Okay? You don't have that at home. Now, if science itself is essentially a methodology for analyzing nature in order to try and find out what is most likely to be true under some specific circumstances, and therefore is not a statement of fact, then you've got to think about what you're experimenting with at home and the fact that you must have a certain quantity of humility, right, to what it is you're finding out. Taking that into account, there's extra reasons why I've got perfect reason to have issues with people who turn around and simplify things and say it works about all kinds of stuff. And I mean all kinds of stuff, because because the phrase "it works" suggests that you don't need to go through any form of experimentation or exploration in order to come to a certain quantity of knowledge. You just accept the fact that this, that and the other is facts, which of course cannot be the case, especially when we're approaching something a bit more wild and woolly, such as ideas and attitudes associated with forms of, let's say, spirituality and spiritual experience. We should have more and more questions. But this process of finding things out means that in your own life there will be some times when you can have your own personal experimental design. Okay, you've only got a sample size of 1, which happens to be you, and you have a control size of 1, which also happens to be you. But you can see how you or how your circumstances and situations changes with various different forces and factors which you bring into your life for the purposes of creating change and growth and progress and finding out about how nature operates and so on and so forth. But the process, from your point of view, has to essentially involve a combination between reading, and by that I mean absorbing or consuming different forms of media, working out which points of view are requiring experimentation. No. Designing right experiments. And then assessing the experiment. Which means in terms of what enhances your knowledge. I mean, when you were way back in school, you were probably told the fact that, you know, within science there's no such thing as a failed experiment, because the purposes of experimentation, the purposes of your reading, the purposes of all of these things is to move understanding forward. Or to put it simple, in more sort of like Star Trekky type language, you know, just to build a certain quantity of understanding and to learn from the experiment. Because an experimental situation is when you're putting things to the test in order to find out what is most likely to be true under some particular circumstances, which you'll never be able to get completely 100% right. And of course, there's always stuff you do not know. Ta-da! That's the terrifying bit. There's always stuff you do not know. So when you're assessing the experiment, you yourself have to be a very special type of individual in the fact you've got to be critical of the ideas that you had prior to the start of your research and understanding, and also the ideas that you developed during the process of building a certain level of understanding, so that you moved on to a better stage. I mean, once you've assessed the experiment, you're essentially got to go straight back to the beginning in some particular respects. But once you've had a certain level of critical analysis of what went on when you're assessing the experiment, that then can provide you with new points of view. Okay, new points of view. But remember, of course, that if you've got new points of view, what you essentially have ended up with, if I can find my little slide again, is a head full of ideas between your ears. Some of these things you could hold on to very strongly, and therefore you say you believe in them, which I'd rather you would not, because belief is not a very useful tool in this, and you can get frozen in belief at times. Or you've chosen to disbelieve. Now, if you've chosen to think negatively of a particular thing, you've then got to ask yourself, why? Alright, why have I developed a point of view of either positive or negative when it comes to that particular point of view? Or whether you have developed negative points of view or positive points of view about that one particular thing. Because if you don't know why, or if you do think you know why, then essentially you're only part of the way forward. Alright? Because once we've developed something which seems true to us, we tend to find a way of stopping. You know, this is what humans do. We reach a certain level of knowledge, and then what we do is we just we tend to just stop. Because all of a sudden, you draw a little bad stop sign there with a little bit of grass growing around the verge there, whatever. It's a stop sign. Of course it's a stop sign. It's got the word stop written in it. There you go. That's my art form today. You tend to just stop in your thinking. And you end up in a state of confidence, arrogance, and sometimes being a bit of an offensive prick. Right, but you've ended up as a confident, arrogant, offensive prick because you've developed another point of view, which is not sufficiently in depth for us to be able to say it's a state of facts. Alright? You've got to work out whether these points of view are sufficiently valid, whether those points of view are strong enough and understood enough based upon the complex process of evidence gaining that you've gone through to be able to make any statement that that point of view has a particular appropriate level of validity. Right? The people who say things like it works about things to do with magic, the occult, witchcraft and paganism, for instance, have essentially stopped at a very early stage of investigation. A very, very, very early stage of investigation, and this does sicken me quite a lot. But if we're going through the process of regarding ourselves as being people who are engaging with nature, whether it is spiritually, psychologically, in terms of alternative health, we've got a lot of work to do in order to try and get our understanding clear and true. Fortunately, when it comes to complementary health, we can actually experiment. There's various different things out there from various different sources which you can actually take a look at and work out whether there's something there relevant to yourself and your own personal situation, which you can have a look at, and much of it will surprise the living crap out of you, I'm telling you. When it comes to spiritual things, I think that there's also plenty of stuff out there which will stagger the living crap out of you. But there's no point ever in stopping at a position of confidence and arrogance, because if you do that, you have stopped the process of perpetual learning and growth. which is essentially what I'm trying to outline here in very simple forms of pen and paper process, speaking about having a hypothesis, a point of view, which you then have to put to the test, maybe 2 or more conditions, and you've got to try and work out what's really going on there. But of course, all of your thinking will be dominated exclusively by what you are at that particular point in time, so therefore there will be various different issues in terms of whichever one is right. And on top of that, you're surrounded by people who have various different opinions from various different sources, some of which can be good or bad, or can be appropriate or inappropriate, or can be explained for right reasons and wrong reasons, and therefore the process of filtering through all the various different ideas which is present in the world can in fact be quite a very serious difficulty. But remember that you've got to be in a position to a certain extent of needing to or wanting to actually grow in terms of knowledge, and this means that you'll be perpetually looking at things which are essentially risky. And when I say risky, they'll go contrary to the points of view of those around you. Okay, it's probably why there's that old adage within the old witchcraft world of to dare, to know, to will, and of course to be silent. So a lot of your experimentation you've got to be pretty silent about. Okay, so essentially the main message of this video is that there is you with the stuff that goes on between your ears, in whatever sense or capacity that might be. But there's also this thing on the outer world, which is called reality, which is really rather big, and there's rather a lot of it there. The quantity of knowledge that you as a human individual has got is incredibly small. But the quantity of beliefs you have about how reality is put together is incredibly big, but all of it is false, because to the most part you're only assessing reality from the point of view of belief or non-belief. Now, and both perspectives are essentially a series of fictions and superstitions which you have built up about reality because your knowledge is very slim. My purpose of bringing this video to you is to point to the fact that experimentation is the way forward. Asking questions, of nature in whatever way that is apparent and necessary for yourself is important. And wherever it is you have chosen to stop right now, I'd like to encourage you to stop stopping and to start going back to experimentation and also further reading. Because if you go through that process, you can actually become closer to understanding a little bit more of what is actually in reality as opposed to what is not. Okay, so this is essentially the process of intellectual growth, from moving away from being someone who even uses the word belief or says you are a disbeliever or you don't believe in this, that or the other, and to move you onto a more experimental way of looking at the world. so that you can therefore look at reality and stay with a certain level of confidence that you've got certain opinions, but you haven't got necessarily specific factual knowledge. Okay? So I can say that my experience to date has provided me with a certain perspective alright, and that's pretty much where we can stop. I can say what I don't have: total knowledge, in some respects I could be wrong, but I'm also trying to enhance my understanding so I can come closer to the truth. Within what areas of study I am focusing in on, so therefore we could call that being discipline specific. Which in my case is more to do with complementary health, things like diet and nutrition, which I've needed to know about, as well as of course things associated with alternative spirituality. What I cannot do state I have total knowledge, what I can do is state some things seem to be true in some particular ways, but even the knowledge and understanding I have and the things that I'm looking into is only true in some particular ways, which is relevant to the ways in which I have been experimentation. So therefore that is informed by and research, which is specific to where I am in my life at this time. Okay. What I cannot do is state I believe or I disbelieve, because both are positions of complete ignorance and stupidity. Especially if I'm talking about nature. Therefore, what I've shown you here, in many different respects, is the difference between, let me just write that up here, honesty, and over here we've got dishonesty. Alright, If I say I believe or I disbelieve, essentially what I'm doing is I'm being dishonest to myself as well as to the whole of human society and anyone who I'm communicating to. If I take this particular attitude, then essentially I am being honest in terms of stating that I don't have total knowledge, I could be wrong, I'm coming closer to the truth, and everything that I know and understand or believe at this or have opinions of at this point in time is very discipline specific to what I've been looking at and the ways in which I've been looking at it. Okay? And therefore, we have some points of view which are diametrically opposite. One of which is dishonest and one of which is honest. The honest point of view is the one which is based upon further research and further experimentation and investigation, using as close as possible to the methodologies of finding things out and going through the process as best as you can in terms of the scientific methodology within the limitations of your life and whatever it is you can afford and whatever it is you can do at the time. Being honest about the things that you don't know, that you've got some questions about, and also moving away from silly ideas like being able to turn around to someone it works about something which does not necessarily fulfill that particular criteria, and what it means to be able to be in a position of being able to have a strong enough opinion to be able to state that something could actually hypothetically be true. Now, if you're the kind of person who's going to go through life from the point of view of believing or disbelieving, I'm just going to have to turn around to you and call you a moron. Alright, it is the majority way which the majority of people assess nature and assess the way that things are, because most people are too insecure to state the truth and to look at things from an honest point of view. Remember, the honest point of view looks at where you are as a person right now and doesn't necessarily state that every single thing that's coming out of your mouth is true or appropriate and right. And also, when you're explaining yourself to other people, there's also the question of ethics. Badly drawn letter H there. Ethics and morality. And a question of what is helpful or what is hurtful. And when you're thinking about what you're saying to people, you've got to work out who you're supposed to be helping, how you're supposed to be helping them, in what way, what benefits are they supposed to be getting from your communications, how is that supposed to move their life forward, that what you're explaining is essentially full of care and compassion. So you're saying things to someone who's suffering or struggling and you're trying to help them out in a very real way. What particular things you want to bring them closer to or further away from. For their benefit, and in what ways you're going to be doing good through your explanations. Alright? Or if it's hurtful, you've got to think about, again, who is it going to hurt? How is it going to hurt them? In what ways that's going to something is going to be beneficial or detrimental to them. So we'll write down beneficial as opposed to detrimental. and therefore whether it is even appropriate for you to communicate with someone in that one particular way. Okay? And ethics is to do with the truth, to do with what ways you'll be encouraging people to experiment and explore, and morality is to do with how you're supposed to be doing more beneficial things as opposed to more negative things for other people, as well as for yourselves, in order to build yourself up as a, an appropriate moral individual. Okay. Now, hopefully I brought you to a certain level of thinking things through in terms of guiding you to maybe a slightly better way of looking at life, looking at reality, looking at trying to work things out and think things through. And so therefore this final paper slide, which I'm going to do in this paper and handwritten PowerPoint presentation that I'm doing using top quality 21st century technology. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Is to point out to you why I think it is so egregious that people use the phrase, "it works." Magic works. The power of prayer works. This religion works. And so on and so forth. And using the words "works" in any way whatsoever associated even remotely with anything religious, spiritual, magical, occultic, spiritualistic, alternative health, because in each and every single case, all right, there is a sense of desperation in humanity, a sense of desperation, and so therefore there is always hurt associated with any form of strong use of language such as the word "works." Because people in this world, they're looking for very real, very tangible results. Alright, in terms of their health, in terms of money, in terms of housing, in terms of clean water, in terms of sanitary conditions, in terms of like this, that, and the other. So the very idea of the word "works" associated with alternative health, spirituality, spiritualism, occultism, magic, and all the rest of that is unbelievably dark. And I mean unbelievably dark. Because there's people with serious disease, abject poverty, neurological diversity, and on top of that there's people who are concerned about issues in relationships, marriages, family, even something as basic as housing. Basically, you name it. The world is full of intense problems. And essentially, you are going to be hurting each and every single person who has even the smallest quantity of intense need, whether that is emotional or physical. So therefore, the phrase "it works" hurts those people, because the results which they demand and they require in order to be able to survive at the most basic level do not come. Okay? Having said that, it's not right for us to say that there is nothing in the spiritual world. or in the religious world which is beneficial to people, or the magical world, or the occult world, or the spiritualistic world, or the alternative health world. But the use of the word "it works" in any permutation of those phrases associated with those things is hurting far too many people. Okay? And this use of this word is predominantly due to lack of science in terms of thinking, thought, and explanation, given to the people who eventually get hurt. Right, so therefore I want to encourage you to go through a bit more of a process and to do more in terms of experimentation and thinking, and to move away from these concepts which have been dominating your mind for such a bloody long period of time, in terms of I believe, or I disbelieve, which is just a load of bollocks which is rambling around inside your little heads. Alright, just crap rolling inside your little head, as opposed to research and experiment. Research and experimentation. And that can be with anything, whether it's to do with complementary health, or whether it's to do with something of a spiritual nature. Okay? This is where I'm coming from. This is what I regard as being the right way of doing things. And I have extraordinary disrespect for people who disagree. Alright? I don't want you to be a person who has beliefs. I do want you to deploy some skepticism, but skepticism is not disbelieving. It is asking questions and going through the methodology of finding things out. And then, if you do it right and intelligently, you will have a balanced explanation. To tell other people. And that will be without false hope. So don't go around telling people this, that, and the other works or doesn't work, because both of those are statements of belief. And not the product of thought. Here ends today's sermon on thinking. Okay? So I've had to do rather a lot of work here. All of these pieces of paper are essentially the slides which you have seen today, to show you something which I regard as being quite a basic level of understanding. And I hope that you will apply this level of understanding a little bit more when you're talking to people, alright? and you'll then be able to build up the ability to act through speech or any other form of communication in a manner that is ethical and appropriate to encourage the search for the truth. No matter what type of truth we're talking about. Okay? I'll speak to you again with my next delightful video and explanation on whatever the heck it is I'm talking about right now. In the meantime, chill out, keep cool, be a person of peace, love, and harmony, and stop being a fucking moron. God bless you all. Or lack of God bless you all, depending upon what you do or you don't choose to believe.